mutually agreed upon. So there's actually more remedies at law in mediation that can be very creative than litigation can actually afford itself to address. Now, if you're in a litigation and you negotiate your settlement, well, more power to you. But in that situation, it's designed to be adversarial, where in mediation, it's designed to be non-adversarial.
Have you ever had one or two of the parties end up hating you during the process?
That's a fair question. I wouldn't say hate, not that I'm mincing words, but you are parsing words. I would say that they will, let's say this, they're going to transpose their views on me. It's called transference in counseling. I think they're transferring, if it's ever happened to me, and it probably has, they've transferred their hate and hostility onto me as the object of their anger rather than where it belongs. And the people who tend to do that are the ones who don't take any responsibility for themselves whatsoever in the situation. So they're always playing the blame game anyway. So this probably happened to me where there's been transference, where I'm the object. Plus, I'm an easy object. Remember, mediators, of the many definitions, we're actually a whipping post for people. I actually welcome and invite that. I'd rather have them do that to me than each other. But almost certainly it's happened where they've transferred their hostilities towards me, and I just kind of dissipated it. I didn't take it personal.
Have you ever had to fire a client?
I've never had to fire a client. In fact, when I teach people, a mediator should never throw in the towel in the negotiation. Our job is to exhaust diplomacy even as they're walking out the door. That's our job. So I've never had to throw in the towel. The closest I've come to that, though, it's actually more intuitive than you might imagine, is there are some folks who cannot represent themselves. In a mediation, when I say represent, I don't mean have legal ideas. No, the mediator provides you with the professional services. I mean who can speak coherently, put two sentences together, defend themselves, have a backbone, just enough so where I'm not doing all their work for them as the mediator, so it looks like I'm defending them. So I have done in the past, not where I've thrown in the towel, but have strongly suggested that he or she needs representation during this mediation. And it works just as well.
When you say representation, what does that mean?
That's, again, intuitive. What I mostly mean with folks is third-party professionals like an attorney. Okay. However, if the other party agrees, and which is one of the many attractive attributes of mediation is, first, no one gets in that room except someone who's a part of the dispute, unless the parties agree. So let's say someone wanted a counsel at their elbow, or a rep at their elbow, someone they can rely on, and the person across that table says, fine by me, because they're covered by confidentiality anyway. I have had occasions where it has been a friend or a relative for, that not only intellectual firepower, but the emotional support, just so the mediation can happen. And if you're wondering why the other person would ever allow that, because it looks like it's 2 against 1, that's my job to regulate those discussions. But secondly, without that, the mediation might never happen. So in all likelihood in that situation, which has come up for me, what I persuaded them is, if you let that person in, mediation will occur. If you don't, this person's going to court, either out of fear or anger.
Wow. Now, is the person that's brought in also bound by confidentiality?
It's exactly true. And in fact, unknown to most of the public, because mediation is fairly unknown, is that all mediation, anything that comes under the auspice of mediation service, is automatically protected by confidentiality in California. But it's so important to me that when people come in, some of the pre-paperwork I send, besides my client contract, and that is a confidentiality agreement to let them know. So even though the presumption at law is it's confidential, whether I tell them or not, I still tell them and have them sign something that it is confidential. So yes, so anyone coming into that room as this, let's call it relative support person. Let's call it a support person. Anyone who comes in, he or she doesn't get in until they sign confidentiality. Once they do that, with the permission of the other side, hey, they're in, no problem. And my job is to manage them, make sure they don't take over the situation, that don't get the fire questions. And just give me paint a brief picture of this. In a mediation, each side doesn't fire questions across at each other as if they're in a deposition. It is nothing even remotely like a deposition. It's a negotiation. One party speaks at a time, regulated by me. So no one's in it. So you could have 22 people on one side and one person on the other. It's still balanced because only one person is going to speak at a time, and it's regulated by the mediator.
Have you ever had people come back and call your office and say, John, I really want to renegotiate our settlement or our arrangement with our kids. I know that you've completed our arrangement, but I need to redo this?
And it has happened legitimately. And again, Either you're being intuitive or you've had experiences, not in your own life, but you've seen divorce before.
It's intuitive. I mean, I'm just kind of...
That's what I'm sensing from you. These are intuitive questions. If you would, rephrase that question, and I'll be able to give you a better answer.
Sure. In other words, has one party come back to you after their divorce was mediated, successfully mediated, and said, I have a new situation in my life. I need to renegotiate the terms of child visitation. And
I have a handle on that now.
Okay.
So the answer is yes. Legitimately, it's called, at law, a change of circumstances. For example, if I'll use myself as an example, if I was divorced and I was, say, the payor of support, I was paying support, well, if I lose my job, that's a change of circumstances. If I get ill, gravely ill, someone has a fatality. So there's always legitimate change of circumstances where someone needs to revisit their agreement. Otherwise, they can't. They're going to be in breach. They think. Or there are some folks too who will say, "Well, I've remarried. I've done this." So as long as it's legitimate, there's always recourse. It's for those folks who are trying to modify anything that would be to the other person's detriment. But if it's a legitimate, that's where they're going to have a problem. But if it's a legitimate change of circumstances, they always have recourse. And what I encourage people is to come back into mediation if something changes, rather than going to litigation. If it worked once, it'll work again. So the answer is yes, it happens, but legitimately it happens.
what about the other states that are like California?
There are 9 community property states throughout the U.S. I'll never be able to rattle them off.
I wish you would rattle some off.
Arizona is one, for sure. I think Nevada, and beyond that, though, I'd be truly reaching and guessing. But there's 9 states that are community property, which means the rest of what's called, the other 41, equitable distribution states. There's a simple, I can define this if you'd like me to.
Please.
In community property, it's the assumption at law is that anything acquired during the marriage is community property. So at the dissolution of that marriage, it's divided 50-50 in very broad strokes. In equitable, which means it's also no fault, though. So let me go further. It's community property / no fault. It doesn't matter what the reason is. Someone could be cheating on their husband and wife. Someone could be doing all sorts of things, drugs or alcohol. And the state, in essence, doesn't care in a no-fault state. So it's going to be a 50-50 deal to dissolution, no matter what the cause was. Whereas in equitable distribution, let me say that straight, there is to show you the slight difference. If someone had cheated on somebody else, as the ultimate example, there's a chance in an equitable distribution state that will come into play, that the reason for the divorce might be considered in those states, but even there, the worst case or best case scenario, depending what side of the fence you're on, is you could forfeit 2/3 of your properties acquired or assets acquired during the marriage if you're the one causing the divorce. That's the only subtle difference. In community property, it's straight 50-50 no matter what the cause.
So in that scenario, it's already really built in systemically for litigation.
Depending if you're talking about equitable distribution or community property. In equitable distribution, there's always that argument can be made. Well, let's go after the person who wants the divorce. Remember, as you actually opened up this conversation, you could legitimately seek a divorce. You fell out of love. I mean, there's no angst, anxiety, cheating. It's just I'm no longer in this relationship mentally or emotionally. So you can do that. But in equitable distribution states, someone could say, let's just go after them anyway, and see if we can win another third more. Whereas in community property, that's why I tell folks you don't exactly need legal representation. The reason is it's going to end up where it ends up anyway. The only time people, and I've met them, I've met people who spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on their divorce and got nowhere. If there's that kind of activity going on, one, they have assets. Two, there's legal wrangling going on. And that's what, either someone's trying to hide something or the legal wrangling is what pads the bill. Because in California, it ends up where it ends up. It either is a community property asset or it's not. If it is, it's divided 50-50. The only discussions about that is if you start negotiating, you take this asset, I'll take that asset, rather than divide the actual asset. That's probably a longer answer than you expected. No.
I hear you. What about people's concerns about the transfer of assets once mediation starts?
And that's actually much of what we handle. Certainly people with children are paramount even with us. But beyond that, it's finances and property. From the beginning of the process, we start to identify what is an asset or what is a debt. And then once enough of the process has gone by, usually the first session, and their heads are in the game where now it's probably